I want to point out that if anybody during this webinar feels the need for support or counseling or has a difficult time, NWAC is available with a helpline at 1-888-664-7808. I'll repeat that number again later, but first of all, let's hear from President Lorraine Whitman. Lorraine?
Well, Alan, and thank you, Grandmother Elder Roberta, for your inspirational words with the opening prayer. I'd like to first acknowledge the territory of Mi'kma'ki, home of the Innu people on Cedar Traditional Territory. Good morning, and thank you for taking this time to be with us today as we explain the next steps that must be taken to end the violence being perpetrated against Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people in Canada. But before we talk about our action plan, it is with great deal of sorrow and with heavy, heavy hearts that we have received the news of the remains of 215 Indigenous children found buried at a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. Our hearts go out to the community members and all of their families. So many of these children were neither deemed to have gone missing or were murdered, raped, tortured, or even starved to death. How could this have happened in a country like Canada? The cultural genocide declared by the TRC and the National Inquiry is real. Today, we are here to talk about a national action plan for missing and murdered Indigenous women as part of the ongoing genocide. The genocide has not ended. We are 2 days away from the second anniversary of the release of the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. It has been 2 years since the commissioners of that inquiry made public their findings that the violence that targets us and our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit sisters is a genocide. It has been 2 years since the commissioners issued their 231 calls for justice. Yet, all we know, very little has changed. The National Action Plan was demanded in the very first calls for justice, a plan that the commissioners said all governments in Canada must develop in partnership with Indigenous people, has not yet materialized. We are no safer now than we were 2 years ago. So we are taking matters into our own hands. We cannot wait for the work of others to begin and actions by others to be taken, to be put an end to the violence. We cannot wait to begin the healing process for Indigenous women who are forced to live in fear and who even today are being subjected to the racism and discrimination that is the direct result of colonialization. We are here to tell you that the Native Women's Association of Canada, the national organization that has represented and defended the rights of grassroots First Nation, Métis, and Inuit women from coast to coast to coast for 47 years, has developed its own national action plan. We will be implementing it, and in doing so, we as an organization will be moving forward on more than 65 of the calls for justice. We are also announcing the most important and effective course of action that can be taken to meet those calls. One that we have already put into effect in one province and hope to replicate across the country. Because that is what our members want us to do. That is what the commissioners of National Inquiry want us to do. That is what the Indigenous women of Canada want us to do. And most importantly, that is what the families of victims and survivors of violence want us to do. Now, you will no doubt have heard that on Thursday, the federal government will be announcing the results of the work that has been done over the past year to create a national action plan. We, like you, will be extremely interested in hearing what they say. We are hoping that what is unveiled to the public by the government later this week is a concrete plan of action for addressing the 231 calls for justice. We hope we will see a list of costed actions that will be taken, starting immediately, to address the ongoing violence. I want to point out that our most important word in the title National Action Plan is action. And we will be very happy to see the government commit itself to take immediate and effective action on the important issue, because frankly, our lives and those of our mothers, daughters, sisters, and aunties are at stake. But I also must tell you that the National Women's Association of Canada will not be among those standing with the government or contributors to the document that will be released. It is with great regret that we had to walk away from the process that led to its creation. It was NWAC, after all, that first sounded that alarm over the missing and murdered Indigenous women with our Sisters in Spirit project. We were at the forefront of the calls for a national inquiry. We provided input to that inquiry, and we had huge hopes when the final report was released, the real action would be taken. But as we said last week, we sent a letter to Carolyn Bennett, the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. We had to respectfully withdraw from the work that the government and the other Indigenous organizations were doing. We believe that the approach that they were taking is fundamentally flawed and inconsistent with the 231 calls for justice. The government created a number of committees made up of Indigenous representatives to provide input to the plan. But NWAC was denied a seat on key working committees where the main ideas for a national action plan were formulated. We were not permitted to be part of the First Nation, the Métis, the Inuit, the 2S LGBTQIA, or the Family Survivors Circle committees. Even though those committees address the issues of importance to exactly the people we represent, that meant we were shut out of the major decision-making process that were intended to create the plan. In addition, on the committees that we were permitted to sit at, we were subjected to lateral violence and hostility. It eventually reached levels that forced us to walk away. And finally, although other organizations were supported financially to carry out the work and to meaningfully participate in the National Action Plan process, NWAC was not. Despite the fact that ending the violence against Indigenous women is central to NWAC's mandate, and the fact that we have been leading voice on this issue for decades, we were clearly an afterthought and perhaps even an unwelcome intruder in the government's process. That said, we genuinely want to work with the government and all parties, including other national Indigenous organizations, institutions, social service providers, industries, and all Canadians to stop this genocide. And we intend to lead the effort. So we are announcing today that we have created our own national action plan, calls our action. The action plan is called Our Calls, Our Action. It was made available on our website this morning. It is a proactive document that has been years in the making. It is a plan created by Indigenous women to be implemented by Indigenous women, and the inquiry intended, as it has been developed in partnership with family members of victims and also with our grassroots members who have told us their priorities in meetings, the 231 calls for justice. It outlines more than 65 actions that will be taken, all of which align with those calls. It is action-oriented, it is fully cost, it is inclusive of the needs of First Nation, Métis, Inuit, and 2S LGBTQIA people, and its goals are measurable. because we have done our homework. And the days of aspirational documents and processes to create a plan have come and gone. It is time to put the calls for justice into effect. Action. This plan we are making public today is just the start. It will be constantly updated and revised to take account of new realities and understandings of the violence that has been perpetrated against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. It will be evergreen. At the core, it is the new resiliency lodges we have built in Chelsea, Quebec, as well as the resiliency lodges that are in process of the buildings in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and other resiliency lodges that will be in hope to be built in communities across Canada. This is the most important part of our action plan. The resiliency lodges are places of healing. They are both prevention and intervention centers that will provide counseling, navigation, support systems to Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. They are places where health and wellness and spiritual programs will be delivered and culture and language can be preserved. They are the safe spaces that will help to bring justice to families who have had their most precious, loved gifts stolen from them. And they will promote economic resiliency and empowerment. The National Inquiry said, social and economic marginalizations is one of 4 pathways for maintaining the violence that targets Indigenous women. At the resiliency lodges, we are blocking the pathway. We are running programs that are aimed at providing First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women with knowledge that they need to find employment or to start their own business and to lift themselves up and their families out of poverty. We have already virtually facilitated more than 200 workshops, most of them based in Indigenous art expression that provide healing and fellowship even as they watch and teach the skills that then can become a source of income. And although COVID-19 pandemic has delayed our abilities to put the Resiliency Lodge into full effect person to person, more than 5,000 Indigenous women have already taken part in these workshops, which we're holding online, and hundreds of others have been benefited from the elder-led online services and support. That's why the lodges, which are based in part on a successful Indigenous model that has been established in Mexico, are central to our NWAC action plan and must be replicated across Canada in the territories. However, you can see by looking at the plan that they are not the only measures to address some of the 231 calls for justice that we have taken or that we will take in the near future. The plan shows the wide range of initiatives related to the missing and murdered women that have come out on our agenda. For instance, we are engaged in commemorative work and promoting the art of young Indigenous women with the help of TikTok. And you can see that our intent to run additional programs out of the new Social and Economic Innovation Center that NWAC will launch shortly in Gatineau, Quebec at 120 Promenade de Portage. It is located right across the street from the building that currently houses the Federal Department of Crown Relations and Indigenous Services. That the people who work in that department will visit our artisan boutique featuring arts and crafts made by Indigenous women from across Canada and the Americas, and our cafe during their lunch breaks. All proceeds from the social innovative model will be based to empower Indigenous women. We do want to maintain the good relationships that we have had with governments over the nearly 5 decades. We will need partners to do this work, but we will also need our independence And we want to take the lead to develop programs by Indigenous women for Indigenous women. We want to take steps forward towards self-determination as set out in UNDRIP and away from chronic dependency. We want the need transformative change and decolonization. Our plan is costed out at $29 million per year. You can see that just 1 million is currently being funded. We will be asking the federal government for some of that money. We will also be asking for funds from other levels of government, from non-governmental agencies, and from foundations and private donors. These funds are necessary to get the work done. This work will be done in partnership with families of victims and also with the grassroots members and the provincial and territorial member associations of NWAC across the country. This, as I said previously, is a plan that has been developed by Indigenous women for Indigenous women and will be actioned by Indigenous women. It is not meant to supplant whatever the federal government or other parties intend to do. It is meant to complement their work and to be complemented by their work. We need everyone, every level of government, every Canadian working with us and the Indigenous women of this country to end this violence. And that work begins today, because the cost of doing nothing for even another day is just too great. We must protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. That is our legal and moral responsibility as Canadians. We must end the genocide. Walalin, merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I would now like to turn the floor over to Gladys Radek. Gladys?
Good morning. My name is Gladys Radek, and I am speaking to you from the Tsimshian Territory, Northern BC, Terrace, BC. And I'm here to talk about the work that I've been doing since my niece went missing in September 2005. And I've been on this journey now for 16 years, where my niece, Marilyn Chipman, still remains missing. And I just wanted to start out with the walks that were done. Back in 2006, there was a walk that we did from Prince Rupert to Prince George to attend a symposium in Prince George called the Highway of Tears Initiative. And it was through that walk that I drew up a template. And I just wanted to let people know that we made a set of recommendations for the Highway of Tears initiative back in 2006. And only about four of those recommendations have been adhered to due to the lack of response from the provincial and federal governments. And the thing is, we have to remember that even with that symposium, also with the BC Women's Report, I was also involved with that program when we were dealing with the Robert Picton era in Vancouver, BC. And then the push for the National Public Inquiry came about in 2008 after we were seeing no actions being done with this Highway of Tears symposium. So we organized walks in and throughout the country to raise awareness about this national inquiry. It was the family members that have been putting all of these recommendations together. It's the families' voices where we've had to bring forward all of the issues. It was the family members that also kept telling us that we needed a national public inquiry to address all of the issues that we've been having since colonization. It was through all of these reports that we realized that This is an actual genocide that is happening. Residential school was mentioned in all of our reports, and I think the push right now, people keep asking us, well, what is it that you need? What is it that you need? Well, first of all, we need health, healing, and wellness centers right across the nation. We have 637 bands of people who have been trying to be, the government has tried to annihilate. They've been trying to wipe us out. They've been stealing our women. They've been sterilizing us. They put us through residential school. We've got germ warfare against us. These are all the discoveries that we as family members have figured out. And the thing is, we know and we need to stop all of these atrocious acts on behalf of the government to protect our women, to protect our girls, to protect our people, because right now we are only 4.9% of the population of Canada, and we are so close to being wiped out. But I'm going to warn everybody right now that our women are resilient, and we are going to take our lives back into our own hands, and we are going to look after our own children, and we are going to survive as a people, because we are not going to take this anymore. And the one step that we do need is the health, healing, and wellness centers, that we can heal from all these 500 years of abuse. And enough is enough. Our women matter, our children matter. My heart goes out to all the families, because when we were walking, I happened to have 3 of our elders who were affected by the residential school. We heard their stories while they were walking. We heard their horrific stories while we were walking. And when we were walking, it was a healing journey for them as well. But there was a lot of after effects that have happened since then, because this is why sexual abuse is so rampant right across the country. It's because those nuns and those priests were raping and pillaging our women and girls, boys too. They were not fussy about who they were raping. And as a result of the traumas that happened to them in those residential schools, where these children were powerless. They were 3, 4, 5 years old. They were powerless to do anything. That's how the priests and the nuns took a hold of our people, by abusing them in such profound ways. And they thought that they were going to wipe us out. Well, you know what? What are you going to do with us once we're healed? What are you going to do with us once we're healed? You know what? You're going to be in dangerous territory, because we know now that we did not deserve this as a people, and your genocide will not work, because we're still here and we're not going away anytime soon.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much for that, Gladys. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Martha Martin. Martha?
I will see you after. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Martha Martin. I am the mother of Chantal Moore, who was shot and killed on June 4th of 2020, which we are days away from it being 1 year of her anniversary. And it's really hard to when you hear, I'm going to start off by, it was such a sad day, when we heard the news of the unmarked grave of 215 children in an unmarked grave of a residential school. I think this right here is going to show just how much our country has been, our Indigenous people have been put through, trying to wipe us out. And my gosh, it's well, sorry. Thought I could try and do this without crying, and it's been really emotional. So on June 4th of 2020, my daughter was shot and killed on a wellness check. And it's so maddening, to know that our police force, they're able to shoot and kill and our Indigenous people, and they're still able to go back to work, and they return to work as if nothing has happened. And as a mother, I am absolutely disgusted that there's no, they just like took my daughter's life as if she didn't matter. Trying to raise awareness on all of the other Indigenous lives that were lost in 2020 at the hands of the law. And one of them, she was only 16 years old. Her name was Aisha Hudson. That was April 8th. Shot and killed by Winnipeg police. Oh my gosh. It's just Indigenous people that had been killed, numerous, time and time again. It just feels like our end, there's no end to our hurting, and then it just, it continues to keep happening to Indigenous people. We had a shooting again in our community on our own territories. An RCMP shot 3 times an Indigenous fellow who had, I don't know all the circumstances. And then, a couple of months later, another First Nations woman was shot. She wasn't killed. She's in an induced coma. And I can't help to think, all of the other Indigenous people, when you think of, in Winnipeg in 12 hours, if this doesn't open people's eyes, where you had Jason Collins shot 12 hours after Aisha Hudson was shot and killed in Winnipeg. And that, there's a long list of names that continues on of Indigenous people who had lost their lives at the hands of the police in 2020. And I think it's time that we stand up, together and demand change within our policing, and how wellness calls are done, because
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, my phone. So on June 4th, we of this year, on the anniversary of my daughter, we will be honoring my daughter, but not only my daughter. On June 4th, we will be honoring all of those Indigenous people who had lost their lives at the hands of the law in 2020 and the following years prior to 2020. We will be hanging up a yellow shirt and a yellow skirt for all of the people that have lost their lives in 2020 with a yellow dress.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you so much for doing that every time. I hear you talk. It's very difficult to control my emotions. As I can see, it's difficult for you to control yours. I want to remind everybody who may be affected by this that we do have that helpline open at 888-664-7808. Martha, is there any words you'd like to say in closing here?
I just like to thank each and every one of you ladies who, we all come together, and I believe our voices are going to be stronger together. And thanks for having me a part of your panel today. Thank you.
You've honored us with your presence. Thank you very, very much, Martha. I really appreciate it. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Lynne Groulx. Lynne, are you there? Lynne?
Oui, can you hear me?
Yep, it's up to you. Yep.
Je rends hommage au peuple algonquin, gardien traditionnel de cette terre non cédée, dont je suis aujourd'hui à Gatineau. Bonjour et merci de prendre le temps d'être avec nous aujourd'hui alors que nous expliquons les prochaines étapes à franchir pour mettre fin à la violence perpétrée envers les femmes, les filles et les personnes de diverses identités de genre autochtones au Canada. Mais avant de parler de notre plan d'action, c'est avec beaucoup de chagrin et le cœur très, très lourd que nous avons appris la découverte des restes de 215 enfants autochtones enterrés sur le site d'un ancien pensionnat à Kamloops, en Colombie-Britannique. Un si grand nombre de ces enfants avaient été considérés comme manquants à l'appel ou tués, violés, torturés ou morts de faim. Comment une telle chose pareille peut-elle avoir eu lieu dans un pays comme le Canada? Le génocide culturel déclaré par la Commission de vérité et réconciliation et l'enquête nationale est réel. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour parler d'un plan national d'action pour des femmes disparues et assassinées, ce qui fait également partie du génocide qui se perpétue. Le génocide n'est pas terminé. Nous sommes à 2 jours du 2e anniversaire de la publication du rapport final de l'enquête nationale sur les femmes et les filles autochtones disparues et assassinées. Il y a 2 ans que les commissaires de cette enquête ont publié leur conclusion selon laquelle la violence qui nous vise et qui vise nos sœurs des Premières Nations, nos sœurs métisses et nos sœurs inuites est un génocide. 2 ans se sont écoulés depuis que les commissaires ont publié leur 231 appels à la justice. Pourtant, comme nous le savons tous, très peu de choses ont changé. Le plan d'action national qui était réclamé dans le tout premier appel à la justice, un plan dont les commissaires disaient que tous les gouvernements du Canada doivent l'élaborer en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones, ne s'est pas encore matérialisé. Et nous ne sommes pas en sécurité maintenant que nous l'étions il y a 2 ans. Alors, nous prenons la situation en main. Nous ne pouvons pas attendre que les autres commencent leur travail et que les autres agissent pour mettre fin à la violence. Nous ne pouvons pas attendre pour entamer le processus de guérison pour les femmes autochtones qui sont forcées de vivre dans la peur et qui, même aujourd'hui, sont assujetties au racisme et à la discrimination qui résultent directement de la colonisation. Et nous l'avons vu récemment avec le traitement honteux de Joyce Echaquan et de Chantal Moore. Nous sommes ici pour vous dire que l'Association des femmes autochtones du Canada, l'organisation nationale qui représente les femmes des Premières Nations, les Métis et les Inuits de base d'un pays à l'autre et qui défend les droits de ces femmes depuis 47 ans, pour vous dire que la FAC a élaboré son propre plan d'action. Nous allons le mettre en œuvre. Ce faisant, en tant qu'organisation, nous allons répondre à plus de 65 des appels à la justice. Nous annonçons également le plan d'action le plus important et le plus efficace qu'on puisse adopter pour répondre à ces appels, un plan que nous avons déjà mis en œuvre dans une province, ce que nous espérons répéter à travers le pays. Parce que c'est ce que nos membres veulent que nous fassions, c'est ce que les commissaires de l'enquête nationale veulent que nous fassions, C'est ce que les femmes autochtones du Canada veulent que nous fassions et, le plus évident, c'est ce que les familles et les victimes et les survivants de la violence veulent que nous fassions. Maintenant, vous avez sans doute entendu dire que jeudi, le gouvernement fédéral annoncera les résultats du travail qui a été fait au cours de l'année et qui vient de s'écouler pour établir un plan d'action national. Comme vous, nous serons extrêmement intéressés à entendre ce qu'ils ont à dire. Nous espérons que ce qui se dévoile au public par le gouvernement plus tard cette semaine est un plan d'action concret pour répondre aux 231 appels à la justice. Nous espérons que nous verrons une liste d'actions chiffrées qui seront prises dès maintenant pour contrer la violence qui continue. Je tiens à souligner que le mot « action » est le mot le plus important dans le titre du plan national d'action. Et nous serons très heureuses de voir le gouvernement s'engager à agir relativement à cet important enjeu parce que, franchement, nos vies et celles de nos mères et de nos filles, de nos sœurs et de nos tantes sont littéralement en jeu. Mais je dois vous dire que l'Association des femmes autochtones du Canada ne sera pas parmi celles et ceux qui se présenteront avec le gouvernement à titre de contributeurs au document qui sera publié. C'est à notre grand regret que nous avons dû nous retirer du processus qui a mené à sa création. C'est l'AFAC, après tout, qui avait été la première avec notre projet Sœurs par l'Esprit à sonner l'alarme au sujet des femmes autochtones disparues et assassinées. Nous étions à l'avant-garde des appels à la tenue d'une enquête nationale. Nous avons contribué à cette enquête et nous avions d'énormes espoirs lorsque le rapport final a été publié qu'il allait vraiment y avoir de l'action. Mais comme nous l'avons dit la semaine dernière dans une lettre à Caroline Bennett, la ministre des Relations couronnes autochtones, il nous fallait nous retirer respectueusement du travail que faisaient les gouvernements et les autres organisations autochtones. Nous croyons que l'approche qu'ils prenaient est fondamentalement incorrecte et qu'elle est en contradiction des 231 appels à la justice. Le gouvernement a créé un certain nombre de comités composés de représentants autochtones pour qu'ils contribuent à l'élaboration du plan. Mais on a refusé à la FAC de faire partie de comités de travail clés où les principales idées du plan d'action national étaient formulées. On ne nous a pas permis de faire partie des comités des Premières Nations, des Métis, des Inuits, des personnes LGBTQIA, ni de celui du Cercle des familles et des survivantes, malgré le fait que ces comités traitaient des questions qui sont importantes exactement pour les gens que nous représentons. C'est-à-dire que nous étions exclus des processus décisionnels majeurs qui avaient pour but de créer le plan. De plus, dans les comités, on nous permettait de faire partie, nous faisions l'objet de manifestations de violence latérale et d'hostilité. Les choses ont fini par atteindre des niveaux qui nous ont forcés à nous retirer. Enfin, même si d'autres organisations étaient soutenues financièrement pour accomplir ce travail et participer véritablement au processus du plan d'action national, la FAC n'était pas soutenue financièrement. Malgré le fait que mettre fin à la violence envers les femmes autochtones est au cœur du mandat de la FAC et malgré le fait que nous sommes la voix principale à ce sujet depuis des décennies, il était évident qu'on avait pensé à nous après coup et que nous étions peut-être même considérés comme des intruses malvenues dans le processus du gouvernement. Cela dit, nous voulons sincèrement travailler avec le gouvernement et toutes les autres parties, y compris les autres organismes autochtones nationaux, les institutions, les prestataires de services sociaux, l'industrie et toute la population du Canada pour mettre fin à ce génocide. Et nous avons l'intention de diriger cet effort. Alors, nous vous annonçons aujourd'hui que nous avons créé notre propre plan d'action intitulé « Nos appels, nos actions ». Nous l'avons affiché publiquement sur notre site Web ce matin. C'est un document proactif que nous avons mis des années à préparer. C'est un plan créé par des femmes autochtones pour être mis en œuvre par des femmes autochtones comme la commission d'enquête le voulait. Il a été élaboré en partenariat avec des proches de victimes et aussi avec nos membres à la base qui nous ont fait part de leurs priorités quant à la réponse aux 231 appels à la justice. Le plan trace les grandes lignes de plus de 65 actions qui seront réalisées, toutes alignées sur les appels à la justice. C'est un plan axé sur l'action. Il est complètement chiffré. Il est inclusif aux besoins des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits et des personnes LGBTQIA et les objectifs sont mesurables. Parce que nous avons fait nos devoirs. Les jours des documents idéalistes et des processus pour établir un plan sont choses du passé. Il est temps de donner suite aux appels à la justice. Ce plan que nous rendons public aujourd'hui n'est que le début. Il sera mis à jour et revisé constamment pour tenir compte des nouvelles réalités et compréhension de la violence qui est perpétrée envers les femmes, les filles et les personnes LGBTQIA autochtones. C'est un document vivant, un document à caractère évolutif. Au cœur de ce plan, il y a le nouveau pavillon de résilience que nous avons construit à Chelsea, au Québec, ainsi que le pavillon de résilience que nous sommes en train de construire au Nouveau-Brunswick et les autres pavillons de résilience que nous espérons construire dans les communautés à travers le Canada. C'est la partie la plus importante de notre plan d'action. Les pavillons de résilience sont les lieux de guérison. Ce sont à la fois des centres de prévention et d'intervention qui offrent du counseling et des services de navigation et de soutien aux femmes, aux filles et aux personnes de diverses identités de genre autochtones. Ce sont des lieux où il y aura des programmes de santé et de bien-être ainsi que des programmes spirituels et où la culture et la langue peuvent être préservées. Ce sont des lieux sûrs qui aident à rendre justice aux femmes et aux familles à qui on a volé leurs êtres les plus précieux. Et ces pavillons encouragent la résilience économique et l'autonomisation. Les commissaires de l'enquête nationale ont dit que la marginalisation économique et sociale est une des 4 voies par laquelle est maintenue la violence qui cible les femmes autochtones. Dans les pavillons de résilience, nous bloquons cette voie. Nous administrons les programmes qui ont pour but de fournir aux femmes des Premières Nations et aux Métis et aux Inuits les connaissances dont elles ont besoin pour trouver de l'emploi ou lancer leurs propres entreprises pour se sortir et sortir leur famille de la pauvreté. Nous avons déjà facilité virtuellement plus de 200 ateliers basés sur l'expression artistique autochtone qui apportent guérison et camaraderie tout en enseignant des compétences qui peuvent devenir des sources de revenus. Et en dépit du fait que la pandémie de COVID-19 a retardé notre capacité de mettre le pavillon de résilience en vigueur complètement, en personne, plus de 5000 femmes autochtones ont déjà participé à ces ateliers qui sont présentés en ligne et dans certaines d'autres ont bénéficié en ligne de services et de soutien par les aînés. C'est pourquoi les pavillons qui sont fondés en partie sur un modèle autochtone efficace établi au Mexique sont au cœur de notre plan d'action et pourquoi il doit y en avoir d'autres à travers le Canada. Cependant, on peut voir en regardant le plan que ce n'est pas la seule mesure que nous avons prise ou que nous prendrons dans un avenir rapproché pour répondre à certains des 231 appels à la justice. De plus, le plan montre que nous faisons aussi du travail de commémoration ainsi que la promotion d'œuvres artistiques de jeunes femmes autochtones à l'aide d'un partenaire TikTok. Et vous pouvez voir que nous avons l'intention d'offrir d'autres programmes au Centre d'innovation économique et sociale de la FAC, qui se lancera sous peu à Gatineau, au centre 120 Promenade du Portage. Ce centre est situé directement en face des immeubles qui abritent actuellement les ministères fédéraux, Relations Couronne autochtone et Affaires du Nord, ainsi que les services aux Autochtones. Nous espérons que les gens qui travaillent dans ces ministères visiteront notre café et notre boutique pendant leur pause du midi. On trouvera dans la boutique des œuvres d'art et d'artisanat de femmes autochtones de différentes régions à travers le Canada et les Amériques. Toutes les recettes de notre modèle d'innovation sociale seront visées à l'autonomisation des femmes autochtones. Nous voulons maintenir des bonnes relations avec le gouvernement et comme nous l'avons fait depuis plus de 5 décennies. Nous aurons besoin de partenaires pour faire ce travail, mais nous avons besoin aussi de notre indépendance et nous voulons prendre la direction pour développer des programmes par des femmes autochtones pour des femmes autochtones. Nous voulons prendre des mesures qui visent l'autonomisation comme le préconise la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les peuples autochtones pour nous éloigner de la dépendance chronique. Nous voulons un changement en profondeur et la décolonisation, nous en avons besoin. Notre plan est chiffré à 29 millions de dollars par année. Vous pouvez voir que le financement actuel est à peu près 1 million de dollars. Nous allons demander au gouvernement fédéral une partie de cet argent. Nous demanderons des fonds aussi à d'autres ordres de gouvernement et à des organisations non gouvernementales ainsi qu'à des fondations et des donateurs privés. Ces fonds sont nécessaires pour accomplir le travail. Ce travail se fera en partenariat avec les familles des victimes et aussi avec nos membres à la base et les associations provinciales, territoriales de la FAC à travers le pays. Encore une fois, ce plan a été élaboré pour les femmes autochtones par les femmes autochtones qui en découlent les actions qui en découlent seront accomplies par des femmes autochtones. L'intention n'est pas de supplanter ce que le gouvernement fédéral ou d'autres partis ont l'intention de faire. Il s'agit plutôt de compléter leur travail et que leur travail complète le nôtre. Nous avons besoin de tous les ordres de gouvernement, de tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes pour travailler avec nous et avec les femmes autochtones de ce pays pour mettre fin à cette violence. Et ce travail commence aujourd'hui parce que le coût de rien faire pour même un jour de plus est simplement trop élevé. Nous devons protéger la vie des femmes, des filles et des personnes diverses identités de genre autochtones. C'est notre responsabilité légale et morale en tant que Canadiens et Canadiennes. Il faut mettre fin au génocide. Merci, Miigwech.
Thank you so much for that, Lynn. We will now turn to Grandmother Roberta for our closing prayer.